Hello. So this is the third video in the series. We've dealt with what poems are about, and we've also dealt with why they're written. We now come to how they're written. And I just want to give you a little bit of a warning at this point, which is to say that you don't have to do this. There are plenty of people who really enjoy poetry that don't want to be analysing how a poem is written, and that's entirely legitimate. You can drive a car without knowing how the engine works. You can enjoy music without being able to read it. And there's no reason why you should bother really analysing how poems are written. It's not essential. And there's a great deal of enjoyment and pleasure and benefit to be gained from reading poetry without asking how the poem is written at all. For example, a poem may well give you a feeling that you enjoy, or enable you to explore someone else's experiences, or you on your own experiences and thoughts. It brings back memories. It can do all sorts of things that are worthwhile and interesting for you, and you can just enjoy the rhythm or the sound of the words without being any more analytical than that. But some people do like to go a bit further, and I personally find that analysing poems often helps me to understand what they're actually about and why they were written a bit better than I did before I started that. So that's what we're moving on to now. It's how poems are written. And in this video, I'm going to just make a start on the subject. We'll have to go on later on in other videos. And I want to look at the idea of voice in poems. What I mean by that is the speaker. Now, it may be there's a first-person narrator of a sort, if it's a poem that's telling a story or describing an experience. It could be that the poet is pretending to be someone else, as we've said before in the previous video. It could be that we're just writing in the third person as a poem, as a poet, and it's very different. But there's still a tone, there's still a feeling, an attitude in the words which the narrator or the poet is expressing. And you want to detect that. Is he being or she being ironic? Are they being humorous? Are they being bitter? Are they being funny? And you need to be aware of the general feeling and tone, hear the voice behind the whole thing. And that links very closely onto the choice of words a poet uses. But before coming on to that, let's just give a bit more thought to how to think about first and third person speakers or whatever. And I find it really helps if you try and imagine the poem written from a different point of view. So if it's first person, imagine it written third person. What would you lose? If it's third person, imagine it first person. Which person? Look at a poem from different perspectives. So, for example, if it's a poem about visiting a dying relative in hospital, it would be a very different poem from the point of view of the visitor, from the person that's dying. Both interesting, but the poet may only deal with one of those two. And imagine the poem written from the opposite point of view, and you realize how important it is who the I is that the poet has chosen to be for that poem. So that is the dealing with the first most obvious point about how a poem is written, which is the perspective, the voice, the speaker, whatever you want to call it. And then we come on to the second thing, which is the choice of words. Now, this is a very big subject, but Again, one helpful way to think about it is to look for key words that stand out. You know how sometimes in newspapers these days, sometimes they will put key words in a larger font than the rest of the sentence to draw out key words, so that when you're skim reading a newspaper, because most of it's rubbish, you're alerted to the really key concepts in an article or in a feature of some kind, or even an advertisement. Now, it's the same with poetry. What we're looking for is the words that really have an impact, that are important. And that is something that is well worth a first glance at when you're looking at the poem. Look for strong, powerful words or phrases for that matter. And again, this business of reversal is a good idea. In other words, imagine the poem without those words. So if instead of talking about an azure sky, the poet had talked about a blue sky, would it have made a difference? What does the word azure add that blue doesn't contain? Look at metaphors and similes. Do they add or subtract from them? Are they really good? And do they add to the meaning or feeling or the experience? Or are they there just as decoration? Look for any words at all that seem to be in a group. So you may find, for example, words like dark, black, night, evil, moon, dusky. They're not the same word, but they're all related to each other, and they're all suggesting a kind of atmosphere. And I think that can be something to look for, related words which are not the same. Obviously, you'd sometimes get repetition of a word or phrase, sometimes perhaps a whole line at the end of each sonnet or something, each stanza. But I'm not talking so much about repetition, although that itself is important, but I think you're looking for words that are related to each other, which help to create the tone or mood or atmosphere and express what the poet is trying to say in a clear way at that particular point. And you may notice, there's a contrast in different bits of the poem. Different kinds of feeling are being expressed with different collections of related words in different bits of the poem. Another thing to look for is words that are echoed at the end, echoing at the end something that was mentioned near the beginning or in the middle. So you're obviously meant to remember something from earlier on in the poem when you get near the end. By the way, always look carefully at the end of all poems. So often contain a sort of punchline which sums up what the poet is really on about. That and the title of the poem are well worth an extra moment of thinking. Now that's all I'm going to say today about this particular side of it. Later we'll go on to structure and lots of other interesting aspects of the way poets write poems. But that's enough for today. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.